Audie Murphy received 24 decorations. He received the Congressional Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, and 3 citations for the Purple Heart. In fact, his life is such a vital part of the American way.
Hollywood has always sold dreams, but behind the glamour of cinema's golden age were men who had lived nightmares. These actors weren't just playing heroes. They had survived battlefields, bullets, and loss. Their real-life scars made their performances unforgettable. The 1940s glittered with studios, stars, and silver screen escape. But war had reshaped the faces of Hollywood. Some actors wore uniforms before costumes, stepping away from fame to fight alongside ordinary soldiers. They endured fire, hunger, and fear, returning with a depth no acting coach could teach. These weren't just matinee idols. They were veterans, survivors, warriors whose battlefield scars defined the heroes they later played. Behind every classic performance lies the echo of gunfire, the sting of loss, and the resilience of men who stared death in the eye. This is the untold story of 10 Hollywood icons, men whose wartime experiences shaped the legends we still remember today. James Stewart James. Stewart had already won America's heart before the war. With films like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and The Philadelphia Story, he embodied sincerity and charm. But when global conflict erupted, Stewart didn't hide behind his stardom. In 1941, even before Pearl Harbor, he enlisted in the Army Air Corps, determined to serve. The journey wasn't easy. He was older and taller than most recruits, yet he pushed through and trained as a bomber pilot. Soon, he was flying dangerous missions over Nazi-occupied Europe. Stewart didn't just fly, he led. By the end of the war, he had flown 20 combat missions, many times returning in planes shredded by enemy fire. He carried the unbearable burden of losing men under his command. When Stewart returned to Hollywood, he was different. His voice carried weight, his eyes a shadow. In It's a Wonderful Life, George Bailey's anguish wasn't performance, it was memory. Stewart's later roles leaned darker, reflecting his lived truth. Audiences felt that authenticity. He wasn't just an actor anymore, he was a survivor. Stewart retired as a brigadier general, but his greatest legacy remained on screen, proving that true heroism meant carrying scars with dignity. Charles Bronson. Charles Bronson's story begins in the coal fields of Pennsylvania, where he was born Charles Bukinski to Lithuanian immigrant parents. Life in the mines was brutal, and poverty left little room for dreams. For Bronson, enlisting in the U.S. Army Air Forces in 1943 was not just duty, it was a way out of hardship. As a tail gunner in a B-29 Super Fortress, Bronson occupied one of the deadliest positions in the air. Isolated at the back of the bomber, he faced relentless danger with every mission over Japan. The sky roared with anti-aircraft fire, and survival was never guaranteed. Bronson was wounded in action and earned a Purple Heart, a medal that testified to his courage and endurance. After the war, he turned toward Hollywood. His rugged face and quiet intensity made him unforgettable on screen. In films like The Magnificent Seven and Death Wish, he embodied the hardened survivor. Audiences believed him because he didn't need to act. He had lived it. Bronson's legacy is one of resilience. Beneath his silence and grit lay the marks of poverty, war, and endurance. His presence was a reminder that some scars remain unseen, yet define everything. Henry Fonda. Henry Fonda was already a rising star in Hollywood when the war broke out, but he chose not to hide behind the comforts of fame. "I don't want to be in a fake war in a studio," he declared, walking away from his career to enlist in the U.S. Navy in 1942. His decision reflected not only patriotism, but also a desire for authenticity, a trait that would later define his screen presence. Serving as a quartermaster on the USS Satterley, Fonda played a vital role during the D-Day invasion of Normandy, one of history's most perilous operations. Later, he shifted to air duty in the Pacific, supporting missions that pushed Allied forces closer to victory. His courage and service earned him the Bronze Star, a recognition of bravery that few in Hollywood could ever claim. When he returned, audiences saw a changed man. The quiet resolve he carried into films like 12 Angry Men and The Grapes of Wrath felt real because it was real. His performances were infused with the weight of experience, a moral strength forged in battle. Fonda's legacy is one of artistry and honor. He was not just an actor, but a man who had lived through fire, returning with a deeper understanding of duty, integrity, and resilience, qualities that made him unforgettable on screen. 4. Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood's journey into Hollywood greatness began with an unexpected test of survival long before the cameras ever rolled. Drafted during the Korean War, he served as a lifeguard at Fort Ord, a seemingly uneventful assignment that gave no hint of the ordeal waiting for him. In 1951, while aboard a Navy bomber, fate struck hard. The plane ran out of fuel and crashed into the cold waters of the Pacific. Eastwood found himself fighting the sea with nothing but willpower. He swam more than a mile through shark-infested waters, clinging to life until reaching safety. That moment branded itself into him forever. Later, when audiences watched him as the unshakable gunslinger or the tough detective, they weren't just seeing an actor. They were seeing a man who had already faced death and endured. His quiet strength, his measured silences, and his aura of resilience weren't performances. They were echoes of survival, transformed into timeless cinematic legend. Clark Gable, often hailed as the King of Hollywood, stood at the very top of his career when tragedy struck. In 1942, his beloved wife, actress Carole Lombard, died in a plane crash while returning from a war bond rally. The loss shattered him. Fame and fortune suddenly felt hollow, and in his grief, Gable sought a way to honor her memory. At 41, he enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Forces, a decision that stunned fans who believed he had nothing left to prove. Unlike many celebrities who contributed through morale tours or publicity campaigns, Gable chose danger. He trained as an aerial gunner and joined crews on missions over Nazi-occupied Europe. Flak and enemy fighters filled the skies, but he insisted on sharing the risks of younger airmen. He even filmed combat footage for training, blending duty with his cinematic craft. When he returned to Hollywood, something in him had changed. His charm remained, but his eyes told a story of loss and mortality. Films like The Hucksters revealed this deeper, more vulnerable side. Gable's service wasn't only patriotism, it was an act of love and resilience. In risking his life, he showed audiences that courage isn't found in scripts or roles, but in choices made when the heart is broken. Kirk Douglas, born Isur Danielovich to poor Jewish immigrants, grew up with hardship shaping his spirit long before Hollywood noticed him. When the attack on Pearl Harbor shook the nation, he answered the call, enlisting in the U.S. Navy in 1941. His role wasn't glamorous, but it was dangerous, serving as a communications officer on anti-submarine patrols across the Pacific. Every mission required vigilance, as silence or a misstep could mean disaster in the unforgiving waters. When the war ended, Douglas carried that same focus and discipline into his acting career. His rise was not overnight. It was built on persistence and a refusal to settle for less. In films like Champion and Spartacus, he carved a reputation for portraying men of fierce will, intensity, and unshakable defiance. Douglas's war experience wasn't about heroics, but about endurance, and that resilience became his legacy. He embodied the immigrant's fight, the sailor's grit, and the survivor's determination to stand tall. Marvin's journey from soldier to screen icon is one of resilience shaped by fire. At just 18, he joined the U.S. Marines, drawn into the brutal reality of the Pacific Front. The war left its mark not only on his body, but on his soul. During the Battle of Saipan, Marvin was shot in the buttocks and spine, injuries that nearly killed him. His recovery took more than a year, and the pain remained a constant reminder of survival. When Marvin stepped into Hollywood, he didn't need to invent toughness. It was already etched into his being. His deep, gravelly voice, hardened features, and piercing gaze became his trademarks. In films like The Dirty Dozen and Point Blank, audiences saw not just an actor, but a man who had walked through chaos and come back scarred yet standing. Marvin's authenticity made him unforgettable. His presence told unspoken truths, that strength isn't about perfection, but endurance. His legacy lives on as a warrior who brought reality to fiction. Reality to fiction. 8. Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy's story begins in the cotton fields of Texas, where hardship was a daily companion. Too small for the Marines and paratroopers, he found his place in the Army at just 17. In combat, he became more than a soldier. He became legend. Wounded and outnumbered, Murphy climbed onto a burning tank, turning its machine gun against waves of German soldiers. For that stand, he received the Medal of Honor, the highest award for valor. When Hollywood came calling, he didn't just act. He relived his war. Into Hell and Back, he played himself, his courage immortalized on screen. But fame didn't erase the shadows. Murphy carried the invisible wounds of war, battling nightmares and restlessness, yet his legacy endured. He was proof that true heroism isn't in perfection, but in the scars carried with honor. Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston's journey to Hollywood greatness began long before he stepped onto a soundstage. As a young man, he enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Forces during World War II, where he trained and served as an aerial gunner in Alaska. Stationed in the unforgiving Aleutian Islands, Heston endured freezing winds, isolation, and the relentless demands of flying aboard B-25 bombers. The environment toughened him, instilling the discipline and resilience that would later define his career. Though he never saw combat in Europe or the Pacific front lines, Heston's service was no less significant. The Aleutian Campaign tested the endurance of every airman stationed there, and Heston emerged with a sense of fortitude that shaped both his personal life and professional path. That strength, born in the icy skies of Alaska, became the foundation for his commanding presence on screen. When Heston appeared in epic films like The Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur, or later Planet of the Apes, audiences weren't just seeing an actor. They were witnessing a man who had already lived through hardship, whose authority was grounded in reality. His booming voice, unshakable posture, and fierce conviction seemed inseparable from the soldier who once manned a gun turret, staring down endless horizons of snow and sky. Heston's service gave his career a depth that transcended mere performance. His heroes felt believable not because of costumes or scripts, but because he carried the weight of lived experience. In an era when Hollywood celebrated myth and spectacle, Charlton Heston embodied a different kind of heroism, one shaped not just by imagination, but by duty, survival, and sacrifice. To Burt Lancaster. Burt Lancaster's beginnings were as unconventional as his eventual path to stardom. Before Hollywood came calling, he was a circus acrobat, known for his athleticism and fearless energy. That same magnetism would later define his screen presence. When World War II broke out, Lancaster enlisted in the U.S. Army. He didn't fight on the front lines, but instead joined the Special Services Division, where he performed for weary soldiers stationed in Italy and North Africa. His role was not to carry a rifle into battle, but to lift morale when spirits were at their lowest. In the laughter and applause of those makeshift performances, Lancaster came face to face with the exhaustion and homesickness of men living through war. That experience shaped the empathy behind his performances. When he transitioned into film, Lancaster's physicality was undeniable. In classics like From Here to Eternity, he dazzled audiences with his strength, charisma, and boldness. Yet beneath the athletic confidence was something quieter, a man who had seen firsthand the emotional toll of war. He knew what loneliness felt like, what it meant to miss home, and how much even small comforts mattered in the darkest times. Audiences may have adored Lancaster for his energy and intensity, but what truly made him stand out was the humanity he brought to every role. His Hollywood career bridged entertainment and empathy, reminding viewers that strength wasn't only about muscle or bravado, it was also about compassion. Behind the glamour of his career was a man deeply shaped by what he had witnessed during the war. Between these stories, a truth begins to emerge. War shaped each man differently. For some, like Audie Murphy, the battlefield made them legends before Hollywood ever called. For others, like Burt Lancaster, service meant lifting spirits when hope was scarce, proving that courage doesn't always come with a weapon. It sometimes comes with a smile, a joke, or a performance in a dusty tent. As audiences filled theaters after the war, they cheered their heroes on screen. But what they didn't see were the sleepless nights, the flashbacks, the quiet moments when these men relived combat in silence. Behind the glamour of premieres and spotlights, some wrestled with demons they could never name. The applause was loud, but the memories were louder. Hollywood, of course, knew how to sell a myth. Posters proclaimed invincible cowboys, fearless generals, and larger-than-life adventurers. Yet, the men playing those roles didn't need scripts to understand danger. They had earned scars in places the camera never went. A limp here, a shadow in the eyes there. Audiences thought it was acting. In truth, it was memory bleeding into performance. Each actor carried war in his own way. James Stewart channeled it into haunted depth. Charles Bronson wore it as a hardened silence. Lee Marvin carried it in his wounds. These weren't rehearsed traits. They were the residue of survival. That's what made their presence different. Audiences might not have known the details of their service, but they felt it. A certain authenticity radiated from the screen, something no studio could fake. Hollywood crafted myths, but behind those myths were medals, scars, and memories too heavy to forget. These 10 men weren't just actors who entertained millions. They were soldiers, sailors, and airmen who had already fought battles far beyond the camera's reach. Before they became Hollywood legends, they were young men thrust into the crucible of war, where survival depended on courage, endurance, and luck. Those experiences left something indelible in them, something that no studio makeup artist could ever replicate. It lived in their eyes, their voices, and the subtle weight of every performance. Today, heroes are often built in editing rooms, brought to life with CGI, stunt doubles, and special effects. But in the era of Stewart, Bronson, Marvin, Gable, and the rest, authenticity came not from technology, but from truth. James Stewart's haunted gaze, Charles Bronson's stoic silence, Lee Marvin's permanent limp. These were not character choices. They were scars. They were memories. They were the quiet echoes of nights when death was only a breath away. Hollywood's golden age sparkled with glamour, but its brightest lights glowed with something deeper. The resilience of men who had walked through hell and returned, not unscathed, but unbroken. Their legacy isn't just the films that made them famous. It is the testimony they carried into every role. The reminder that true masculinity, true heroism, is not about being invincible. It is about carrying wounds with dignity, about standing tall even when the weight of the past threatens to crush you. Behind the golden screen was steel. Behind the charm was sacrifice. And behind every unforgettable performance was survival. These men didn't just play heroes. They were heroes, etched forever into both history and cinema. If you enjoyed this journey into the real stories behind Hollywood's toughest men, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with friends who love history and cinema. Your support helps keep these powerful stories alive.